when I decided to retire, I had just a few months shy of 25 years on with the state police. And being a part of the governor's detail, you get a raise for the kind of work you have to do. You're away from home a lot. You have to wear suits every day. It's just kind of a different line of work, and it's basically a small scale version of the Secret Service because we do the exact same thing. So when you do that, you get a raise when you first get on there, and then after 6 months you get another 10%. So you end up making lieutenant's pay. So I was able to retire. You get your high 3 in the KSP, or you did. I'm not sure how it works now, but so I retired at lieutenant's pay, and was fairly comfortable as far as where I was at when I retired, and I knew or hoped that there would be some opportunities coming along, because anytime you work with other details, they're like, oh man, they'll be blowing your phone up, wanting you to do protective details, and and right before COVID, I was actually working as a consultant with a company that wanted me to head up a dignitary protection detail, because Bluegrass Airport in Lexington is where all your celebrities fly into, and your high-profile people, for local concerts, your rock concerts at Rub Arena, just different things like that. And then when the Kentucky Derby rolls around, a lot of people fly into Lexington and then just drive over to Louisville on Derby Day. So I had that rolling. We had drawn up the plans. We, were trying to figure out how many people we need, but basically all the logistical stuff. And that's what I was going to do, because there was a company in Lexington that does a lot of transportation, and we were going to partner up with them. Well, COVID hit, and we were doing security evaluations in the company I was with, and nobody wanted you in their buildings. Nobody could get together. There were no concerts. All your ball games, had nobody in the seats and all this kind of stuff. So, the basketball season basically got canceled during the tournament. So it was a mess. So fast forward a little bit, and I decided I was going to try to work for the post office, maybe get another retirement. And man, I tell you, I loved a lot of the people I ended up working with, but when I first got hired on, I got stuck at the Lexington plant at Christmas time. That was a nightmare. Christmas time with the Postal Service is not for the faint of heart. It is awful. You're lucky to get a day off if you work the plant. You don't get 2 days off in a row. If you work at a post office, you're lucky to get a day off from Thanksgiving on, because that's peak season is what it's called. When I was at the plant, I'd been a trooper for 25 years, and I'd been all over the world. I had, wined and dined. I feel like Ric Flair, but I'd wined and dined with kings and queens, and been in embassies all over the world. I'd been in the coolest of places, met awesome people, and they were treating me like I was the same as this 18-year-old kid that just got out of high school. And I was like, this ain't gonna last very long before I go off on somebody. And right after Christmas season, they decided they didn't need that many people at the plant, so they started shipping us out to the post offices. Lexington's got 6 or 7 post offices or whatever, and so they sent me to one, and it's kind of the same thing. You start from scratch. Got these young kids in there, got supervisors that all they've ever done is Postal Service stuff, so they don't know how to talk to anybody. Same at the plant. And so literally it was the same thing over again, and I'm getting up at 2 in the morning, having to be there at 4 a.m., to work a shift, distributing packages and all this stuff. And it's just, I was like, what in the world? And so I finally got to come to my home county of Georgetown, Scott County, but it was Georgetown Post Office, and a lot of great people there. I got to transfer up, and it was a 2-minute drive from my house. I could ride my motorcycle to work. It was awesome. But peak season was horrible, and Postal Service doesn't have that much help anyway. You're always behind the 8 ball. You're always running behind. You're always chasing your tail. So you can get 2 days off in a row. Christmas season, same thing. You don't get to work. You don't get to have your days off. It was just awful. Postmaster was awesome. People I worked with were, for the most part, really good to work with. I did passports there. I did, lots of things like that. But it just wasn't for me, and I was miserable. And the sheriff came in and asked me one day. He said, because I'd met him at a governor's event. Same governor that was in his political party was having an event at one of the local places for a fundraiser. And I got to talk to the sheriff quite a bit. And so he came in one day and he said, "Hey, what do you think about being an SRO?" And so I thought, well, my wife was a speech therapist at one of the schools that had recently lost their full-time resource officer. And the county didn't have that many to start with, resource officers. And, they'd come out with that law that said each school has to have one in it. So, I basically went home and thought about it. And, and the crazy thing was I went to church that next Sunday. Didn't even mention it to my wife because I was just going to think it over because I knew what she would say. And, I told him when he asked me that, I was like, well, the only way I do it is if I go to the school that my wife works at. Because her two youngest go there too. And so, so it was just kind of one of those things where I knew what I wanted to do. And I was only about 1.5 years into the retirement phase because you have to get converted in the Postal Service to full-time regular, which I didn't realize when I first started. And another thing with the post office, I wanted to be a postal inspector because I had 25 years of law enforcement experience, but their cutoff age is like 36 to be a postal inspector, postal police. I'm like, yeah, why would you want somebody that's got experience in that position? Put some kid that doesn't know anything in there and let them do it. Where I could have stepped right into it and done, been in the investigation part of it. But no, I was, 20 years past that, basically. So, or 15 years past that. So anyway, long story short, go to church that next Sunday after he had asked me, and he goes to that church. And it didn't dawn on me at the time, but he says, "Hey man, what do you think about that offer? You think you're gonna do it?" And of course my wife's standing there and she's like, "What offer?" So that pretty much sealed that deal, and I was a school resource officer just a few months later. So anyway, best decision I ever made. It was, I really had no plans to go back into law enforcement after I left the road, went to the detail, because that was a big career boost. I was so burnt out doing accident reconstruction and suicides, and shootings, and all that stuff that comes with it. Death and destruction everywhere. I was done with law enforcement. Plus, it had changed a lot since I had worked the road. Because now everybody had cell phones and shoving them in your face, and you were going to be YouTube famous if you talk smack or had to handle the wrong person, and all this kind of stuff. So, but I thought about, and I was even asked to come back to the detail as a Trooper R, which is a retiree that can come back, but you have to do it within a 5-year window. The detail commander called me a week after my 5-year window had expired. I kid you not. So, they couldn't do anything about it, because if they do that for me, they have to do it for everybody, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, but when I had retired, I I was in a relationship, and we each had jobs and just kind of split the bills. Well, we went through a breakup, and then I am single, and then I meet my current wife, and she has 4 kiddos. My 2 were almost grown at that time. My son was just finishing up college. So it just kind of I don't know, it's like God put me in that position, because she had an ex-husband. She was in the process of finishing up a divorce that was lasting forever, and still almost 8 years later is still an issue, because he just will not stop. Everything has to go through court. Everything has to be a court order, all this BS. So that's another video. But I just felt like God put me in that position because he wasn't very involved. She had no financial support from him, and 2 of the kids were adopted that were his family members, but he got up and walked out and left her with all 4 kids. So like I said, I just felt like God put me in that position. And in saying that, it was kind of the money that I had saved up dwindled pretty quick, just because, and it's not her fault, but it's because of court and attorneys and all this BS that he was just nonstop with. And it was just kind of one of those things where I felt like God put me there. I felt like it was basically my job to help her, and so after a while, retirement money doesn't necessarily pay all the bills. Your house payment, your car payment, all that stuff. So that's the reason why I decided to do the postal thing. And so the reason I'm saying all this is you make all these plans for when you retire to live a certain way. You feel like you're going to be comfortable enough when you pull that pin, and that's what you're going to do, and you're going to that's the way you're going to live your life, and then God happens, and then things, obstacles get put in your way, and so it doesn't always go as it's planned. And so that's kind of the reason why I'm interested in doing the YouTube channel, and because I'm just an ordinary guy. I've been able to do some cool things just by virtue of right place, right time, or jockeying for a position that I didn't think I would ever get, and having opportunities I never thought I would get, and those are some of the things I talk about in some of my videos. Just things that I never thought I'd get to do or whatever. But I'm just an ordinary guy. I've got a grandbaby now, and I want to provide the best life I can for her, for my daughter, and her husband, and the baby. Any way I can. Still helping my son, and and then she's got her 4 kiddos. So, but all that being said, time is your biggest thing, and if you wait to retire when you think everything's going to be perfect, it'll never be that way. One of my best buddies that I worked the road with, he retired as soon as he could at 20 years, and had a pontoon boat, had it, he became head of security at this big hospitals, where we're from, and just had it made. And one day his wife finds him out cold in his office when she's supposed to go meet him for lunch, and he has a brain tumor. So less than a year later, my buddy was gone after he had made all those plans. So it's never the perfect time. And if you think that life is about going around the obstacles, you come to find out that life is the obstacles. The obstacles are what give you your character. They give you your life lessons. They give you they make you divert directions you didn't plan on going, and then it works out for the best.